And they're women that they figure people aren't going to miss. So who are those women? Right? Women on the streets for the most part. It's not to say they all were, but they were pretty smart in the beginning about who they were going after. They were looking for people that had no attachments. Nobody would miss them. Nobody would know they were gone. And then they did finally get caught on number 17. So
awesome. What happened to them?
Right. And this is over a number of years. This is not, they didn't all do it in a week. And, it was over the course of quite a few years. But such an interesting story. And then, of course, when they get caught by the cops, one of them turns Crown evidence against the other.
Oh.
And so one essentially doesn't get hanged. And the other.
Oh, I thought they were both hanged.
Well, they eventually, yes, but he turned state's evidence or, Crown evidence.
Oh, naughty.
Against him. So the other interesting thing is that one of them now resides in the medical museum in Edinburgh. And you can go and you can see his skeleton on display.
No way.
At the university. So an interesting story. So Burke was actually executed. So he was the one that was hanged. Hare escaped by literally confessing against Burke. So he was now, again, eventually, they kind of get caught up with each other. But Burke is the one that hangs. Burke's body is now in the museum in Edinburgh, and you can go and look at him on display. So I find it all kind of rather ironic and interesting.
Yeah, the irony that his body became what he was doing, that he was selling people. Right. Yeah, now his.
Were they bad guys? Oh, yeah, they murdered 17 people. But it's kind of a strange thing. It's like, I'm not going to give them any leeway for their heinous crimes. But at the same time, you can almost understand why they're doing this because there's poverty. They have nothing. They can't get work.
Yeah, they're desperate.
Essentially desperate.
Yeah.
And, so desperate people do desperate things. And so now we get back to these great little coffins. The little figures inside the coffins, they're all hand carved, as are the coffins. So the coffins are actually carved out of one, like a solid piece of wood. They're not glued together, joined, or they're just carved out. So somebody was getting, a branch large enough, a piece of wood large enough to actually carve them. They're rather crude and rudimentary, as you can see by the picture behind me. There's nothing particularly fancy, but it looks like it may have been done by more than one person, maybe two people, because we have two pretty distinct styles. We have the one with the rather rounded ends, and then we have the very square ones. So that could indicate that two people were actually carving these. Or simply somebody decided they wanted to vary between the shapes of the coffins and made rounded corners and square corners. We'll never know because we don't know who did them. The figures that are inside, for the most part, everybody who looks at them wants to deem them as male. And I'm sort of two minds here.
Yeah.
They're very rudimentary. They're not meant to, they're representations, not necessarily literal exactings of
exactly.
In some cases, the arms have even been lobbed off, or things have been shortened because they didn't fit in the little coffin after it was done. So there, one arm is missing or two arms are missing. And this was done by the artist, not, after the fact. They didn't just break off and get lost. This was actually something done. In terms of the clothing, so let's talk about the clothing. Did you guys have a chance to actually look at this stuff up close? Because
that's interesting because the stitching who is relevant in knowledge in that kind of ancient stitching, analyzed the threads and said, oh yes, this thread is from such and such time period because this type of thread did not exist before such and such date.
I can explain that because prior to 1800, we have thread that's generally 1 or 2 strands in thickness. So in order to have a stronger thread, they would spin 2 pieces together to give it more durability. But by 1800 and around 1810 to 1812, particularly, 3 twine thread becomes the favorite because it's very strong. So it's 3 strands of thread that are twisted together. Coats, the manufacturer that still manufactures today, was manufacturing thread in that time period. And they made commercially available to the public 3-strand or 3 twine thread. They were one of the first to do it. So it's a really interesting story that you can look back and date. Now, when I look at the garments that are on these figurines, for the most part, I'm just going to like lean this way. We can see this one right here. This one right here.
Yeah.
Where are we? There we go.
It's more patterned, isn't it? The material.
Because it's patterned.
Yeah.
It's not patterned commercially. So this was not a fabric that you could purchase commercially at the time. This was hand inked.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. So they actually drew that little pattern. More than likely, once they wrapped the doll, they drew the pattern onto the fabric, because there's areas of the fabric that do not have any pattern on it. If you're able to actually look at some of the pictures. And as I said, I was really lucky because I was able to get into the back end of the research archives to really have a look at this, and to look more deeply at, these outfits on these figures. I won't go as far as to call them dolls, because I don't believe they had any reference to being ever a doll. They're an effigy or a figure, a representation, loose representation of a person. Why did they all look masculine? Probably because it was just way easier to carve a straight figure without trying to make it look feminine.
Yeah, it seemed more important for whoever created them or owned them, for them to fit into the boxes, because if you notice the arms are missing, it seems like the priority is for it to fit in the box, as opposed to keeping the arms on it and not fitting in the box.
Right.
So, yeah,
which makes us feel that it definitely is just meant to be a representation. It's not meant to be literal or 100% lifelike and accurate in terms of who are in these little coffins. So how do you feel about the story about the sailors? The story that Ian discovered about the possibility of a shipwreck with a number of sailors, that perhaps this was something that it was representative of. Now that we've talked about this, how do you feel about that?
It's possible, but I tend to gravitate towards the Burke and Hare theory.
Yeah, same here. Yeah.
Well, and I find that interesting because, first of all, for me, I don't believe it's shipwreck, not because of the effigies themselves, but because it's fairly clear that these were buried at different times. So you had 8, and then there was, however much time went between, could have been a year, could have been more, and then there was 8 more. And then the fact that the very last one was virtually looked like it had just been placed there, tells us that this was going on for probably a period of, they figure, maybe 20 years.
Oh.
So even in terms of Burke and Hare, I'm not sure I'm buying into that either.
Well, that's a long time period.
Yeah. Well,
20 years is a long time.
It is.
And I'm sure Burke and Hare weren't doing this for 20 years.
Well, no, they weren't. And they were also caught and dealt with.
Yeah.
While it makes for a really great story, I'm not really sure even this is a Burke and Hare thing. I mean, it works because there's 17 coffins, but from the way that these were laid out, it sounds like the intention was to continue with more coffins as they go, because there was already a lower layer, a middle layer, and they were working on a new layer at the top. But only one coffin was there when the boys found this. So if the boys had never found this, how many coffins may have been in there? Who knows? There could have been, it was quite a large hole that they had dug into the side of the hillside. It wasn't just enough to wedge these little caskets in. It was actually, it had quite enough room to put several more layers. So that kind of tells me that this is more than Burke and Hare. As much as I love Burke and Hare and I love the story of Burke and Hare.
I love the Burke and Hare story, but that's just me. I love things like that.
I just don't think it
but
works.
yeah,
I don't think the sailor story really works either, because if this was to represent sailors that went down in a shipwreck, then it
would have all been categorized
together at the same time.
Yeah. Right. And the other thing is, could this have been perhaps people who died in the village around the location where this was? I mean, I know they say Edinburgh, and it's in the Edinburgh Museum right now, but Arthur's Seat is outside the city. And if we go back to the late 1700s, Edinburgh certainly wasn't what it is today, but at the same time, you have outlying villages and areas that perhaps this was a representation of maybe people that died within a certain
and I was actually surprised when I was doing the research, looking it up, that it came up as Arthur's Seat, the Arthur's Seat coffin, coffins.
Right.
You know, and I did a little bit of looking at that. And if you look at the Arthur's Seat, if you look at the landscape, if you are able to get a picture view, maybe on Google Earth, you can see that there's I was surprised to learn that it's a long extinct volcano.
Edinburgh's sitting on a long extinct volcano.
Yeah.
So,
I've got an interesting question here.
Okay.
And it's just a stupid question, but okay. Arthur's Seat, it's called that because it is claimed to be the location of where King Arthur had Camelot. Now, do you think there's a possibility that these 17 statues could be related to the story of King Arthur and his knights?
Oh, okay.
How many knights are there?
There you go. Can you?
Is there about 12 knights?
There, I don't know how. As I say, I guess we all kind of froze up there, or somebody froze up.
No, did we freeze up? Sorry, okay, I was thinking. I was in surprise because that was sort of a revelation.
Is claimed to be the location of where King Arthur had Camelot.
Yes.
So my dumb question here is, do you think there could be a reference with these figures to the King Arthur story? Well, considering the location of where these figures were found on what is supposed to be where King Arthur's Camelot was supposedly been.
So there originally in the story, there's 25 knights at the round table. So it's possible
25, not 12. I don't know why.
It was creating 25 effigies and just didn't get that far. And they
as you say, if it appears that there, okay, so we had 17. If it appears that there may have been plans for more,
yes,
interesting that there could actually be a King Arthur connection